Hi, I'm Jay Walpert, and I was one of the writers on Pirates of the Caribbean.
G'day, my name is Stuart Beattie. I was the second writer on Pirates of the Caribbean, The Curse of the Black Pearl.
Hi, this is Ted Elliott, and the next voice you hear will be...
This is Terry Rossio, and we wrote the screenplay and co-wrote the screen story for Pirates of the Caribbean.
My stuff is mainly in the first half of the film. The latter half of the film, when the curse plot takes over, is more Ted and Terry's work. For instance, I can tell you this opening scene originally came from the first writer's draft, Jay Walpert. So I just thought this was a great way to open a film, especially a pirate film, where you're probably expecting the big pirate battle at sea. The idea to open up in fog and it's quiet and eerie just sort of, to me, gave a great eerie tone.
I did what was called a take, which is just a way and approach to the movie. I wrote my draft, by the way, in the Andaman Sea on a tall ship because I did research as I was writing. It was a great way to write this movie.
Ted and Terry came in, the guys who wrote Shrek and Academy Award-nominated writers, and they were like ready to listen then to the idea of undead pirates or, the pirate skeletons, which were so much a part of the ride.
I want to give Terry full credit for what I think was one of the smartest decisions. We wanted, obviously, to work the elements of the ride into the movie, and one we were stuck on was the song. We wanted the song in the movie, but we simply could not find a way to justify a bunch of pirates singing that song.
It was going to undercut, I think, some of the intensity and villainy of the pirates to have them going into that song. So it occurred to me that one way to bring it in would be through the young Elizabeth character, almost as if it is a children's song that she was taught back in England.
I love this parasol. Still don't know why Gore put it in, but man, it works. Just again, that oddity, that weirdness of what is going to happen, just preparing the audience for something perhaps a bit different.
Norrington there was, in my draft, in league with the bad guys. His quest was for power. He wanted to rule the Caribbean, and he was first going to do that by trying to marry the governor's daughter and gaining power through marriage. And when she turns him down in the first act, he went in league with the bad pirate captain, whose plan, in my draft anyway, was to take over control of the Caribbean, much like Henry Morgan did in the late 1600s.
What happened here?
The biggest challenge in writing a pirate picture, indeed a swashbuckling picture, is the balance between character and action and comedy. That is really the challenge.
Pirates. There's no proof of that. It was probably an accident.
There's a little moment coming up here that is so key to the whole romantic relationship between Will and Elizabeth. One of the things that happens is, since there are only two kids that you see here, you immediately start to
associate them.
Yeah, associate them together as a pair, as somehow appropriate. The moment that I think is very telling is she reaches down and actually just kind of moves his hair aside just a little bit, and it's pretty much from that point on, yeah, those two are going to end up together.
It's okay. My name's Elizabeth.
First acts are always about setting up characters, how people are, what they care about, what they want, why they can't get it. And so this was all about setting up that Elizabeth is the governor's daughter, and she's secretly in love with Will, though she may not know it, but she can't marry Will because he's a blacksmith. And it's a whole class issue. Great love stories, I think, always have just one central conflict keeping the two apart. And as long as you focus in on that one thing and make every scene that they're together about that one thing, then I think you're on the right track.
The fun little moment here is because she took this pirate medallion, she actually starts the film as a pirate, as a thief, goes to the end of the ship where nobody else is in order to look at it, so you justify she's the only one who actually sees the Black Pearl out there. But then, as she wakes up, you can immediately start to question, well, wait a second, was that a dream? Was that a memory? Was it partly real?
How much of what we saw was really what happened? How much of what we saw is what she believes happened?
So then we see that certainly the medallion is real.
And by the way, for people who are interested, Elizabeth is actually the protagonist of this story. I just want to point out it's Elizabeth's actions throughout this movie that propel all the other characters into action themselves.
And also, just from a almost technical screenwriting point of view, she's the access character into the story. The story is told from her point of view, so she has to be in a scene for us to see what's going on, or a character that she introduces us to, or a character that's related to her story also becomes our point of view characters throughout the story.
Beautiful day. I have a gift for you.
I just want to say that I always thought it was really nice that Governor Swan let his wig go gray gracefully.
Back to character introductions. The first thing we see Elizabeth do is actually steal a medallion. I love that Swan coming in and says, "Still a bed at this hour," and even on something that minor, he's still concerned with propriety and what she should be doing.
I also have to say, I love the warmth that Jonathan Pryce brought to this character. We wanted the immediate impression to be, oh, here is the uptight, stuffy governor, in the same way we wanted the immediate impression of Norrington to be, here's the, wig-wearing, tea-simping, pompous British aristocrat.
I'm told it's the latest fashion in London.
Well, women in London must have learnt not to breathe.
My lord, you have a visitor.
This is the first big laugh of the
sound effect here. Just
the first big laugh of the movie is right there. But again, the first thing we see Will Turner do as he comes in is he's
something stupid.
He's clearly not comfortable in this strata of society.
I want to say just one thing is Orlando Bloom signed to the movie the day before he showed up to shoot this scene, and came right in and just got the character. He just was there, and I think he had like about 10 minutes to work on the stuff with the sword, the flip, and everything like that. Yeah, so there are a couple of outtakes of that sword kind of becoming dangerously unguided, but just how well he plays this scene is just amazing. Everything about the character you need to know comes across here.
Commodore Norrington.
I actually, and I've said this before, I never met a sword I didn't like. I mean, I just have always loved swashbuckling movies since I was a child.
A craftsman is always pleased to hear his work is appreciated.
I love when Kira comes down the steps, sees Orlando, her hand goes to the corset where you know that the medallion is just a little callback to say, yeah, it's still there.
About me?
You really get a sense, especially when he says here, that he won't call her by her first name. He'll call her by her proper title. That's a clear indication to him that he knows his place and her place and the great divide that exists between them.
See, at least the boy has a sense of propriety. Now, really must be going. Very well.
Dear Mr. Turner.
Come along.
Good day. Elizabeth.
Something to keep in mind is kind of how Johnny is introduced here as Jack Sparrow. I mean, the introduction is just, I think, one of the great character introductions, and there's a lot of reversals in it. Of course, you believe he's on top of a stately ship, but he's not.
That is one of the greatest entrances I've ever seen for a character. Walking in on the top of his mouth like that, and I know every time the audience sees it, they get a huge kick out of it, and they're right into him and his character. Right from the beginning, they know everything they need to know about Jack Sparrow in this moment, just by the way he enters, and that is very clever writing. That's really well done.
Johnny actually gets 4 introductions. He gets the joke of coming down off the mast.
That reversal.
He gets the bit with the hanging pirate there.
Very,
and I
very
love the fact that there's one of them that is actually, there's a noose there empty.
Now, here's something maybe of interest, is that actually everything Johnny's doing in the scene up to the point where he steps on the dock, he's doing backwards because the mast actually didn't sink. They were raising the level of the water, and somebody was pushing the dock in. It was just a little bit of that magic of movie making. I thought it was just very peculiar.
So his third introduction is this grand shot here of stepping aboard the dock.
It's a shilling to tie up your boat at the dock. And I shall need to know your name.
What do you say to 3 shillings? And we forget the name.
Welcome to Port Royal, Mr. Smith.
And this is his fourth introduction, which is his duping of the dockmaster here, giving him money and then ending up with getting it back. It actually all plays into Johnny's character, which is he's a guy who, no matter how bad things go, feels that somehow the universe will come around to his point of view if he can just hang on long enough. Utterly confident enough to just throw dust in everyone's eyes and create havoc and figure that he can then turn it to his own advantage.
Ooh, he's up to something. Sneaky. The characterization, the personality of Jack was what we wrote. The expression of that personality is pure Johnny Depp. I mean, it was, how did you put it? Exactly what we described, but nothing like we anticipated.
Johnny Depp, an actor even more than he's a movie star, meaning he's really good. I mean, he's a great actor and a very brave actor. And I wish we could all con him into doing this all over again because he's so terrific.
This dock is off limits to civilians. I'm terribly sorry, I didn't know. If I see one, I shall inform you immediately.
Interestingly, this scene here, this next scene, the conversation between Murtagh and Mulroy and Jack, is exactly as we wrote it in our first draft. I mean, it's pretty much word for word. I think Johnny threw in a couple of words. Well, in this case, I think the original line was, there's some sort of fancy to do. He threw in high tone. How did you merit an invitation? I think he made it, how did 2 fine upstanding gents like yourself not merit an invitation? But basically what he did was he just kept adding more and more words, making his part larger and larger.
One of the things about Johnny's performance as Jack Sparrow...
Wait. I just want to point out here that there is actually a cinematic predecessor to Jack Sparrow, as evidenced in this scene, and it's Bugs Bunny. That was, bizarrely enough, Jack Sparrow is a classic trickster type of character, which is a character archetype that personally I really love. You just don't see very many of them in Hollywood movies. But it always works. It's such a great character. But it's Groucho Marx or Bugs Bunny are kind of the predecessors to Jack Sparrow.
And the way that character works, actually, which a lot of the critics certainly have missed, is that character needs to work in a reality world where that character can work, where it's appropriate. So Murtagh and Mulroy here have to play a certain level of absurdism in order to justify Johnny doing what he's doing. And comes the Bugs Bunny moment here. How did he get
over there?
And it has to be
wait. This is one of my right there is one of my favorite shots. Just that one shot of Johnny with the hand on the wheel. I just love that shot. Just his expression and the attitude. But again, and here he goes again. If you've watched enough Bugs Bunny cartoons, I swear Jack Sparrow is the type of guy, if he didn't feel that the reward for his arrest was large enough, he would saw Florida off the mainland of the USA and send it down to Cuba. That is the kind of guy Jack Sparrow is. I thought it was really interesting that Johnny keyed into another Warner Brothers character, Pepe Le Pew, this was a guy who believed the world was different than how it actually is, which I thought was really interesting.
Here's the same sort of scene that I had with Norrington Elizabeth, where he's saying, I want to get married to you and live happily ever after. And in my draft, she just went as far as turning him down, which of course triggered him into his plan B, working with the bad pirates. This is when the curse plot really starts to kick in with Ted and Terry.
I really like this scene because it could have been played wrong so many ways, but this is the moment where you start to find out there's a little bit more to Norrington than maybe you'd expect.
One of the big discoveries for us, I think, on this film, though, also was that Kira is a comic actress. Yeah. She's just amazing. Her physical humor, her comic timing is as good as anything I've seen from any actress.
This moment right here was so important. The way we imagined it was she had to just vanish. Just vanish so quickly that you couldn't really comprehend that she was falling off a cliff until you saw her fall off the cliff.
For trivia buffs, when Johnny down at the dock there says, and then they made me their chief, he's actually telling yet another version of how he got off the island.
Exactly.
Although
that's the Robinson Crusoe version where he makes friends with the cannibals from the neighboring island.
Exactly.
Maybe you do not lose.
You know, the other thing, just in terms of production trivia, Kira fell off the fort, which was actually just south of Los Angeles. This was in the Caribbean. Johnny dives off the ship in the Caribbean and then rescues her in a tank in Long Beach. So there's 4,000 miles between those three shots. 8,000 miles total, back and forth.
One of the things I love in movies is when characters take quick, smart action that gets us right into the next scene. And that dive where he just immediately says, okay, I'm going in. You know, not a lot of lead time or preparation. Just bam, we're on to the next thing.
One of the things that was actually I really thought was very funny was, obviously, again, because of the production schedule, Kira had not actually been in the water in any of these outfits when she was like shooting this scene. And so when she was finally doing rehearsals, like in the water after the plank walk and she's wearing the shift, or when she was training to do the drowning and the tearing off the dress, she came to me and she said, you know, when I first read the script, I really thought the whole tearing the dress off thing was just gratuitous.
Which it was, actually,
well,
in a sense.
But then she said, but that thing weighs so much. There's no way anybody could swim. It actually makes sense. I said, right, the tearing off the dress at the beginning is not gratuitous. The strip on the plank, that was gratuitous. So
we sort of love that this is actually a film about a corset. If the corset had not been too tight, and it's really fun to get away with such an obvious symbol of
societal constraint and propriety.
I mean, it's about as blatant as you can get, but it actually works.
Oh, and another bit of trivia. The East Indian Trading Company did, in fact, brand pirates with a P, but they did it on their foreheads, not in their arms. But the decision was made, and again, we actually could have pulled it off, I think, on his forehead. You very rarely would have seen it, but I think it would have just lurked in people's minds that Jack Sparrow has this huge P branded on his forehead. So we decided to go with the historically inaccurate brand on the arm.
Jack Sparrow, well, I don't see your ship.
And a lot of the dialogue, we actually wove in important elements of the plot and characters. And one of them, for instance, is the introduction of Jack's compass. It's introduced as a joke. It doesn't work. It doesn't point north. But of course, later on, you find out, wait a second, that compass leads to Ile de Muerta, which then you understand, oh, Jack has always known where Ile de Muerta is.
But you have heard of her.
Commodore, I really must protest.
There's nothing like seeing your words come alive on screen as a writer. That's what you do it for. At the end of the day, the screenplay is a blueprint for something else. So to see the actors say your lines, to see the sets, to see the story come alive, and then, of course, to see an audience respond to that, that's what it's all about. You know, that's what happened here, hook, line, and sinker.
And my hat. Commodore!
Miss Swan.
One of the great things about Johnny's performance is, for as drunk as he seems most of the time, every now and then we see that he's really dangerous. And he's basically one step ahead of everyone else, which was always the idea for Jack Sparrow. I think I was into an animal phase when I wrote this, you know, being Elizabeth Swan, because she's graceful like a swan. Sparrow, because he needs to be free and fly like a bird. That's who he is.
Easy on the goods, darling.
I stopped short of naming Will Bear or something. Because after two characters named after animals, it starts to get a bit obvious that's what you're doing.
You will always remember this as the day that you almost caught Captain Jack Sparrow.
And Jack Sparrow just has a great ring to it, I always thought. Great pirate name. Poor Royal Navy soldiers, you know, it doesn't pay to be a Royal Navy soldier in pirate times. You just get beat up and hit upon and killed by undead pirates.
Now will you shoot him? Over
Again, it's just so clever to cast Johnny in a big action movie like this because he doesn't do big action movies like this, and he just brings that air of originality to it that is just so fantastic. Couldn't ask for better than this. I think Pirates works as a story because, it's all our childhood dreams to, grow up and be pirates and sail the seas and be free. And that's really what Jack Sparrow represents. And it's just fun, audiences dying for something fun and original.
So here's the first meeting between Jack and Will, and it's one thing to do a sword fight and do the choreography of it and make it interesting, inventive, exciting, and all that, but I think the accomplishment of this scene is to actually do a sword fight and actually have there be character interaction. I'm particularly pleased with how different lines are interwoven. The sword fight is actually not only conflict between the two characters, but each character illustrating their position, their beliefs. It's more than just simply trading insults in the course of the sequence.
There are two ways to write a good sword fight scene. One is to say Will and Jack face off and the battle ensues and leave it up to the choreographers. And then the other way is to literally go through it and write it in a way that is exciting. You don't use passive verbs. There's no he is standing, it's he stands, that creates the more immediate action, immediate tension going on. And you write it crisply and you write it sharp and you figure out moves and you figure out, what the room is and figure out what the elements are in that room and can you use them and you really create that emotion on the page that you want the audience to be feeling while they're seeing it. If you want you want it to be a funny sword fight, like in The Princess Bride, that was all written out by William Goldman, beat for beat, because it was informing character. The best action beats inform character, and you'll see it in this. Whenever you have action that is separate from character, then you're going to end up with a boring action scene. The best action scenes all speak to character. This makes you laugh at Johnny and laugh with Johnny and gets you, again, more on his side and everything.
Have I threatened you before?
I'll make a point.
The most important thing to action scenes, at least is how Terry and I approach them, is they've got to be story scenes. They've got to carry plot, they've got to carry character, and the action itself has to demonstrate plot and character. And we provided the outline of the story for the fight choreographer and specific actions to kind of say, well, here's the strategy that Will's employing, and here's the strategy that Jack is employing, and here's the goals they both have. Jack throughout just wants to not fight with this guy and get the hell out of there. And Will wants to basically kill himself a pirate, particularly a pirate who he knows threatened Elizabeth.
Excellent form. Well, how's your footwork?
Will always, it's very subtle actually, a different point, but he'll always let Jack have time to recover. He'll always engage him in sort of a classic fair way, whereas Jack, as it will be revealed, is perfectly willing to cheat. I think people are going to think that Will throwing the sword and pinning Jack in the room is a setup for later. But actually that was written before there was going to be a need for it in the end sequence. And it was something that we looked back and found and then used.
Yeah, it really was Will has this ability. Let's use that. Not, let's set up Will's ability for later here.
Again, a discovery made in the course of writing the story.
We did not write a donkey. This was actually something that was added in. I'm not sure where it came from Gore, the production designer, but it created this movement in the scene in opposition to the movement of the two men fighting. It's really a great addition. It really works well.
I do. And I practice with them.
One of the discoveries we had in writing the scene, which we didn't have until we got into it, was we realized, wait a second, the Will character makes swords. We have a whole room full of swords. We can grab swords from anywhere, anyhow. We can lose them. We can pick them back up.
And are otherwise incapable of wooing said strumpet. You're not a eunuch, are you?
I practice 3 hours a day so that when I meet a pirate, I can kill it.
All good films have at least one central relationship going on. And you hear the term buddy movie, things like that, but it really all comes from this idea of the relationship between two people and the tensions between them. The characters is what you remember. Plots come and go, but characters stay. And that's one of the great things about this story, this film, these actors, these characters. Rise above the story and you remember them, and they're funny and you like them, and they grow and they learn, and it just makes the film that much more enjoyable. I mean, if you didn't care about these two characters, you'd be watching here a 10-minute scene of two guys fighting and you wouldn't care. And you'd be eating your popcorn, checking your watch, checking messages on your phone. But because you're so invested in these two guys already, and because of the way this fight is choreographed, where it's very, very specific to their characters, that you're totally involved in it.
Another bit of trivia, the soot used here is actually chocolate powder. So there you've got some chocolate-covered bloom right there. Just thought I'd mention that. Jack had to be a very morally ambiguous character. The audience should never be quite sure, wait, is he a good guy? Is he a bad guy? What is he exactly up to? When we wrote this scene and he had the gun on Will, he actually raised the gun before he said, this shot's not meant for you. Johnny played it so that he held the gun on Will the entire time. And the line about the shot's not meant for you is almost a plea saying, don't make me shoot you. And it just increased that moral ambiguity of the character in a really terrific way.
You've assisted in the capture of a dangerous fugitive.
Just doing my civic duty, sir.
Well, I trust that you will always remember this is the day that Captain Jack Sparrow almost escaped. Take him away.
This is one of the funniest scenes in the film, just a little homage to the ride, to remind audiences that this is inspired by the ride in its most general sense. You know, the ride doesn't have its own story, it just has vignettes. So right from the beginning, we weren't looking to make a movie out of the story of the ride. We were very much looking to make a story that stood on its own, that had little scenes or vignettes from the ride that you could wink at and give the audience a laugh.
It's actually scene with the maid here is actually suggested by Jerry Bruckheimer to get more understanding of Elizabeth's character.
And it works very well.
It does.
But the Commodore proposed. Fancy that. Now that's a smart match, miss, if it's not too bold to say.
It is a smart match. He's a fine man. It's what any woman should dream of marrying.
Well, that Will Turner. He's a
I love writing strong women because they don't have the weapons to be strong that men do. You know, you do a John Wayne scene where he beats the heck out of Ward Bond in some bar, and we know, oh boy, don't mess with him. But the women don't have that easy way out. So their strength has to come in more subtle and more complex ways, and it's always a challenge.
Black Pearl actually came out of character, oddly enough. We needed a name for the ship that would be appropriate for both the villain, Barbossa, to be in, also something that you would be appropriate for a character that you end up liking, which is Jack, and so Black Pearl kind of gives you both.
Has had a very trying day.
The attack here on Port Royal was always central to get the story going. Just to give you an idea of the way it morphed into this, in Jay's draft, it was Elizabeth on a boat returning to London to go marry a gentleman of proper stature, and the bad pirate captain hijacking the boat and kidnapping her on the boat. In my draft, it became more of a stealthy attack, but the pirates coming to Port Royal and kidnapping Elizabeth out of her house. It was like 4 or 5 pirates sneaking in, killing the guy at the door and kidnapping her, and Will being really like the only one who knows what's going on, and chasing them, trying to rescue her, and then failing. and the pirates taking Elizabeth to their pirate captain. Of course, you see in this draft, it's the full-scale assault, where they're really pillaging the town. So it's a good example of how things change from draft to draft.
This was amazing. Being on location when they were shooting this was so complicated. You never see it, but all of this was shot at once. This was all actually a single take. Well, this was actually in Universal Studios. The stuff on the beach and on the docks was shot in the Caribbean. And this approach to the boats, the initial gunfire, the approach with the pirates coming off, this was shot multiple cameras in a single take. And what was extraordinary, they got it in one. They did 2 takes, because they always do one for insurance in case something goes wrong. But the first take on this, I have to say that the stunt coordinator and the stunt guys on this movie were extraordinary. They just did an amazing job.
There were a lot of pirate conventions we obviously had to follow. The reality is that pirates were murderers and rapists and cutthroats, and really not the kind of people you want to be hanging on to. But, they've been romanced over the hundreds of years to be, this great swashbuckling role-playing image that we have. Pirates never walked a plank, pirates never buried treasure. They spent their treasure. That was the whole point. So when you talk about pirate conventions, they're really pirate untruths, but you still have to acknowledge them because as an audience, that's what we know. And you're not making a documentary, you're making a movie. And so that's why you want Walking the Plank. That's why you want the buried treasure in the caves. And then you want to, play with things like Iron Avast and matey and bees and I be this and I be that. Because that helps describe the world that we know of as the pirate world. And so, right from the start, all my dialogue was much like that. And we had all those kinds of ideas, the buried treasures, the planks, all that kind of stuff.
There's a really key moment coming up here that, just from a screenwriting point of view, probably wouldn't be noticed, in fact shouldn't be noticed, but the maid here very overtly states that they're here to get you, they're here to kidnap you, you're the governor's daughter. And that's actually laying in information for a very difficult scene to write, which was all the way forward on Barbossa's ship. The notion was to put it in Elizabeth's head at that moment and in the audience's moment so that she doesn't give her name. And that just
This is the moment right there, that one shot of, I just want to say, the one shot of Kira looking at Mackenzie is where I absolutely fell in love with Kira, where I was like, this was the right actress in the right role.
Again, she's just amazing physical actress.
Yeah, she commits to the character completely and plays it fully, and just so much that she does with the eyes and the expression. It's just wonderful.
It reminds me of some of Lucille Ball, some of just the great...
Carole Lombard.
Yeah, the great physical actresses.
The moment with the maid again is actually, that moment causes the audience to accept when she gives the wrong name to Barbossa.
Right, later on the show.
There are basically 3 categories, in my view, of swashbuckling movie. There is the one I call Dark at the Bottom of the Dungeon, which is a serious swashbuckling movie. This is the kind that The Count of Monte Cristo was, in which a dark crime or a dark menace. Then there's what I call the stylish adventure. This has more fun in it. You may not be quite as involved with the characters. You may not be living or dying with those characters, but you are involved. Mask of Zorro is a good example of that. Scaramouche is the quintessential example of that. George Sidney's version of The Three Musketeers in 1948 is a very good example of that. Now, there's a third category, as it turns out, because Pirates of the Caribbean belongs to almost its own category. It's, I guess, what I would call the rollicking high adventure. You still care about the characters. You don't care desperately about the characters. Whether they live or die, you kind of care about, but practically anything else can happen to them, and it's okay. Because you are so involved with the good time that you're having, with the special effects and the swinging and jumping and running and all that stuff, that it's okay. So basically, you begin with a tremendous involvement in character when you are dealing with the dark kind. And then, as you go along with the other categories, there's more and more an emphasis on action and comedy and less on character.
Goodbye.
So far in this story, there really hasn't been a whole lot of supernatural stuff going on, which was fun to actually do the slow reveal. But the idea was, this is the guy that he threw his axe into his back, and you'd think that he'd be dead, and here he is again. Will definitely looks at him like, how could you still be alive? But that is supposed to actually play as a hint that these pirates are actually supernatural and more or less unkillable.
My sympathy strength gives no manner of luck at all.
I just want to point out, Jack is the worst escaper of all time. He does not escape. And there's a hidden Mickey. There you go for your Disney fans. He does not escape from anything on his own. But again, just as Johnny put it, that run between the raindrops attitude of Jack. He's always trying to get out and is able to turn the world to his advantage so he gets out. But he actually is incapable of escaping from anything on his own.
Well, again, Johnny's performance is amazing, but it is framed by all the other characters. It's sustained by the situations that he get to put in. Everything goes into a performance like that. Cinematography, editing, but particularly the surrounding characters who have to create the environment for him to play off of.
What we have here is Jack Sparrow.
Here's one of those moments I was talking about wherein you have to really pay attention to the information. You get in this story that these guys are threatening him, that they know each other, but there's actually establishing a timeline that Jack was on the Black Pearl prior to them going to Ilha Muerta and becoming cursed, that he knew about the curse, but didn't actually believe it. So that's actually some important information there, but it really is kind of hidden or woven in with the forward movement of the story, which is, and by the way, that's where Jack realizes that if they're cursed, that means that all the stories he's heard about them wanting gold and needing the blood of Bootstrap Bill to get the curse undone are also true, and suddenly he's seeing there's a way for me to get the Black Pearl back.
I also like just well into this movie, it's the first truly overt
supernatural moment.
Cue to the audience that says, yes, this actually is, there are ghosts in this movie. There are walking skeletons.
This introduction of Barbossa actually matches the one of Jack. Jack is in the light, Barbossa's in the dark, but they're both standing above everything else. And one of those odd things that just came out of conversations between Terry and Gore and I is that Terry and I are big fans of the Sergio Leone Westerns, which are basically taking Western conventions and adding this era of mythology. There's the idea that some of the characters in the Sergio Leone Westerns are basically gods. They are more than just mere mortals, and they walk amongst mortals and they get involved in their lives, but for the most part the issue of the gods belong to the gods. And that idea is actually played out with Jack and Barbossa. They are actually the light and dark of the same trickster archetype. Again, here is basically Barbossa. The whole thing with the vocabulary and not understanding, you could see that being something Jack would do. The deal he makes, the loopholes he finds, and they actually are paired in that way, as one is the light side of this trickster concept and the other is the dark side of the trickster concept.
I recognize this ship. I saw it 8 years ago on the crossing from England.
Did you know?
There's 1,000 little things you can do to make a story better. You can't all use them all these tricks at once, but you find what works for the story. But one of the ones that is a constant in action movies, at least, is making sure that your villain is the biggest, baddest villain that you can come up with, because that only makes it harder for your hero. And audiences love underdog stories, and it's all about obstacles. If everything was easy, you'd have no drama, which is no conflict, and it'd be boring. So you have to pitch your heroes against impossible odds, and then you've got something good. Because once they overcome those odds, then you're involving the audience. If you can get the audience to ask, man, how are they ever going to succeed? And then they do succeed and it's believable, then you're hooking your audience in. and that's great storytelling. David and Goliath, the same ideas go back to the Bible, the storytelling from thousands of years ago. The bigger the enemy, the more triumphant the win, the more you're involving your audience.
A bargain.
This is the scene that was actually set up with that little maid scene. And it's a very tough scene, and it only works, I think, in conjunction with the following scene in the jail cell, where the audience is cued that the name Turner is important, and she only picks the name Turner as a way to avoid revealing that she's actually the daughter of the governor.
One of the things that just came down to having seen young girls and teenage girls that I know when they liked a guy trying out the name.
Yeah.
You could see maybe if Elizabeth had a Peachy or a keeper catcher, she would have
She'd
written
be
on
doodling
it,
Turner.
Mrs. Elizabeth Turner, things like that.
They've taken Elizabeth.
Mr. Murtaugh, remove this man.
We have to hunt him down. We must save
This is one of my favorite moments because it's such a linchpin scene, but it's so well hidden in conflict between Will and Norrington. But we've got our Murtaugh-Mulroy characters, and they mention Jack Sparrow. Nobody would have thought of it. The whole movie would not have happened if it wasn't for these background comic characters piping up at exactly the right moment about Jack. And then you have to say, well, why did they bring up Jack? Well, because Jack did mention the Black Pearl. Why did Jack mention the Black Pearl? Again,
he wants his ship back.
It's the Jack Sparrow character throwing out whatever he can throw out whenever he can, this information about the Pearl. And if he hadn't have done that, if he hadn't have mentioned it, Will wouldn't have heard it here, and Will wouldn't have gone to the jail, and the whole movie wouldn't have happened.
Do not make the mistake of thinking you are the only man here who cares for Elizabeth.
The 3 things you need to do in order to become a pirate: 1, steal a small ship; 2, make a black flag; 3, declare war against the world. And that was basically the idea with Will, to take him through those 3 steps. First he steals the ship with Johnny, and then in my draft at least, they made a black flag, and then the end battle was declaring war against the world. It's a great journey for a character to go on, because at the beginning he reviles pirates, and then he has to become one in order to rescue the love of his life.
Miscreants sail from the dreaded Isla de Muerta. It's an island that cannot be found except by the...
Orlando's performance here just says everything about this character. He doesn't want to tell him what the real reason is. Just how much anger is tied up in this guy and this character just comes through so well.
Part of what's fun about the Jack Sparrow character is he is aware of the notion of storytelling while he's in the story. And right there he does a little bit of mocking the story that Will is in. Will is trying to be the hero of his own tale and go off and rescue this fair maiden. And at different points, Johnny's very aware of not only what's happening, but how they will play in legends.
He understands cliches very well. He plays off them very well. There's also, just in terms of what it's like working on a script, we had written the script and done a couple of drafts, and then we realized that it was very important for a later scene that Will knew that the name of the captain of the Black Pearl was Barbossa. And then we realized there was no point in the story prior to him knowing it that we established any way he could have known it. So we rewrote Johnny's dialogue there. Initially, he just said, when Will says, well, where does it make birth? He says, haven't you heard the stories? It sails from an island no one can find. And we changed it to, haven't you heard, Captain Barbossa and his crew of miscreants, blah, blah, blah. And Johnny got the new pages, and he comes up to me and goes, I can't believe you're giving me exposition. Guy is canny, guy is sharp. He knew exactly what was going on in that moment. And we said, yeah, okay, it is exposition, absolutely. But we also gave you the word miscreants. And he goes, okay, there's an even trade-off. And so he did it, and he played it in that sing-song light delivery that just made it all work so well.
That ship, no. One question about your business, boy. There's no use going. Just go.
This sequence where they steal the bigger ship to get the smaller ship is one of the things that I'm most proud of, just because more than anything, this whole sequence was was from my draft and something that I'd come up with. And again, it's action, but it's action informing character. I knew they needed to steal a ship to get out of there, which again was part of Will slowly becoming a pirate. How they steal the ship, okay, well, let's see, who are these characters? Well, Jack Sparrow, okay, what's he going to do? He's not just going to steal any ship. He's going to want the fastest ship. Pirate ships were small ships. They were fast ships to get away and to attack and get away, hit and run. That was the pirate specialty. So where this whole sequence came out of was trying to say, okay, let's have the small fast ship be impossible to take. Okay, let's take the big ship, which no one would think of taking, which has very few guards, and then they'll come out and chase us, and then we'll take their ship when they board our ship. And that just... again, it helps define these characters. It defines Jack. And of course, half the fun is all the way through, Will has no idea what Jack's doing and thinks it's insane and we're going to die. But Jack's really one step ahead of everyone.
This ship cannot be crewed by 2 men. You'll never make it out of the bay.
Son, I'm Captain Jack Sparrow.
I'm Captain Jack Sparrow. He's saying I'm 2 or 3 steps ahead of you guys, and you don't even know it. And that's what we come to realize. And that's what's great about Norrington thinking he's the worst pirate he's ever seen. Because he's really the best pirate. Because he does the unexpected.
Rash, Turner. Too rash. That is without doubt the worst pirate I have ever seen.
Here they come.
I just always get the good laugh in the theaters. When people realize what he's doing.
Search every cabin, every...
See, he knows what he's doing. And that's why I end up trusting him and loving him, because he's really got it all figured out. For as much as a buffoon as he pretends to be, he's really, really very sharp. And he's getting everything he wants.
Back to the interceptor, now!
That was really cleverly cut together, that scene. The way it was directed and edited gets it going to the point, and you get everything you need. And again, that's where you see Jack Sparrow's 10 steps ahead of everyone else. And again, it's the kind of thing that just gets you totally invested in the hero, which is paramount in these movies. You've got to care about the leads, about whose story this is. The second you lose that, you lose the audience, and it just becomes another loud, boring action film. And one of the things that succeeds so well in this story and in this movie is these characters are so great, and they stay in character.
That's got to be the best pirate I've ever seen.
So it would seem.
When I was a lad living in England.
In this scene, Will has noticed that Jack only started to agree with him once he found out some bit of information. The audience noticed it, and kind of the rule is, well, hey, if you have to cue it to the audience, then let your lead character there actually clue into it as well, because that way, he's at least as smart as the audience
I'm
member.
not a simpleton, Jack. You knew my father.
I know him. Probably one of the few who knew him as William Turner. Everyone else just called him Bootstrap or Bootstrap Bill.
I was actually researching this when I wrote Quest of the Caribbean 12 years ago, and I watched all the old stories, Captain Blood and Seahawk and all of them, because they were the ones that I was trying to emulate, that tongue-in-cheek kind of tone, but still with the real jeopardy, real stakes going on. And then, of course, I looked at the ones that weren't so successful, the Cutthroat Islands and the Pirates of the World, to make sure that I avoided those pitfalls that those stories made. And so that was very much a part of researching this and making sure we got it right, was knowing, you always want to know who your predecessors were, what shoulders are you standing on, that kind of stuff. And so studying all those old films is important.
For instance, you can accept that your father was a pirate and a good man, or you can't. The pirate is in your blood, boy, so you'll have to swear with that someday.
Wonderful thing about a pirate ship is it has wonderful stuff. You got great props to use. One of the happiest moments for me in writing Pirates of the Caribbean, when I wrote my drafts, was the utilization of have on a ship. The pirate ship is a collection of props. You could just go on forever throwing stuff at each other. So it's great fun. It really is.
This is the famous Tortuga scene from the ride that we just had to have in there somewhere.
All right, ride references coming up here.
There was a guy chasing a woman back over there. There's the guy on the barrels.
Yeah, the drinking out of the barrels with the shots in them.
It'll linger.
I'll tell you, mate.
And this, of course, is the redhead. We once the redhead from the bride auction. And if you look really closely, there's actually a banner up there that says, buy a bride. And, of course, back in the background, you can see others.
Giselle.
Great fun places if you're a pirate. This is where the pirates spent all their money. You know, this is why there was never any buried treasure, because they spent it all in places like this.
Can't you for breathing, you fat-jawed idiot! Mother's love. Jack.
We see Gibbs as a member of the Royal Navy in the prologue. We don't see him again. You don't ever expect to see that guy again. Here he shows up, and he's now a pirate. The guy who hated pirates now a pirate, and we're just expecting the audience to fill in this guy's story.
That's what's great. There's no explanation. We give no hint as to how that happened, but it's interesting that it did.
He's drinking and not a particularly good sailor at the beginning. He has some problems with Norrington and with authority, and that's the only hints we give to how he ends up. There are people chasing in the background there, but the one that you can't see is the goat on the bar. There's a goat on the bar.
Now, what's the nature of this venture you're in?
I'm going after the Black Pearl. I know where it's going to be. I'm going to take it.
Jack, old errand. Are you no better than me the tales of the Black Pearl?
Again, this scene here is where there's a lot of sort of tip of the iceberg information woven in, that there's been stories and legends told. It goes back into the jail cell where the guy says, I've heard stories about that ship, and Murtaugh has heard stories and dismisses them as being not true. And here we're starting to get the feeling Jack knows an awful lot more about the Black Pearl and that situation.
We also start here we start to set up
the leverage.
Another key and difficult scene coming up, which is that at some point Will has to understand that he can't trust Jack, and that Jack doesn't have his best interests at heart. Also, another reference to the key importance of the Turner name, all of which we're holding back in terms of story, but all of which is
being set up in this moment here.
Exactly.
The toast they do here actually came from hanging out with the crew of the Lady Washington. When they're pulling into a dock, take what you can, give nothing back is a reference to pull in as much as you can when it goes slack, and then don't let that slack go. So it's an actual nautical reference right there that was a perfect pirate toast.
You'll be dining with the captain, and he requests you wear this.
Well, you may tell the captain that I am disinclined to acquiesce to his request.
This was a lot of fun.
Once again, our desire to get Kira in as many great outfits as possible takes over.
And here she gets to be the pirate maiden, which is a lot of fun.
Women in pirate movies have always been great, you know, and fun, and it's fun to write Elizabeth, you know, because she's feisty, she knows what she's doing, she's independent, she's strong-willed, strong-minded, and doesn't care about how she looks when she eats. And that's it's a lot of fun to write. Put a woman into this mix of cutthroats and scallywags, and not to have her just be standing on the sidelines batting her eyelids. We certainly wanted her much more involved in that. We wanted her in the action, doing stuff, and very much a part of the plot. I mean, she is the key to the plot. It's her being kidnapped that triggers the story, and then it's Will's love for her that gets the story going after that. A lot of people have asked if it's an adventure story, it's a love story, and to me, I think it's a love story really at heart, because there wouldn't have been a story if Will didn't love Elizabeth. It would have been Elizabeth being kidnapped, and that would have been the end of it. But because he loves her so much, he goes to all these lengths. That's what drives him, and that's what drives the story. So at the end of the day, I think it's a love story between these two people separated by class at the beginning. The worst thing in the world happens, and they ends up being the one thing they needed to get them together. That's good storytelling.
In a stone chest, Cortez himself. Blood money paid.
Working on this scene, just the technical aspects. Terry and I, when we wrote this scene, one of the things going into the movie, we knew we wanted to have moments where people told stories, where they told stories about their lives or their backgrounds or about other characters. And this was one of the major ones, was the revelation of the curse and how the pirates discovered they were cursed and the effect that it has had on them. We wrote this, basically it's a monologue. It's a 3-page monologue here for Jeffrey.
That's exactly what I thought when we...
And then when Jeffrey came on board, we must have spent, 20, 30 hours with Jeffrey just on this scene, refining it as he created his performance, as he came to understand how he was going to perform it. And we came to understand what's the information we need him to say, and what can Jeffrey do with a look or a sneer or a lift of the lip.
Jeffrey's process was that he always wanted to discuss the scene, talk about the character, talk about the lines, rehearse it. And I was amazed. Long after I thought we had it, he still wanted to refine it and still wanted to go over it. And it did just keep getting better.
I think it works. Also, I just want to point out, in this scene, the mechanics of the very important part about the curse. Whoever takes a piece of gold out of the chest becomes cursed. This is one of those things that I don't know how people missed it, because he emphasizes it once, and then he talks about how, there was the chest and inside was the gold. We took it all.
I love that we got to use the word slake in the story there. I think slake our lust is maybe my favorite phrase.
All the scattered pieces of the Aztec gold must be restored and the blood repaid.
Great performance by the monkey.
We have the final piece.
And the blood to be repaid?
That's why there's no sense in killing you. Yet. Go.
He actually says, "Arr!" I love that.
Now, here's a key moment in terms of the mechanics of the curse, is that there is blood on this knife here. So the pirates, while they cannot be killed, they do actually bleed. And we made a very strong point of that so that it made sense to return the coins with the blood repaid, so to speak.
It's a great reveal. Seeing the pirates in all their glory and skeletons for the first time. Really great moment. And again, this goes to the heart of, putting a woman in the middle of the action, and seeing how she does.
The idea is not that the pirates are actually skeletons who by daylight look like they have flesh. In daylight, in anything but moonlight, they actually are flesh and blood. They're simply immortal. Whereas by moonlight, what it is their real state is revealed. And this is the state of somebody who, this is basically a personification, embodiment of greed. These are guys, they've been starving and thirsty and frustrated for 10 years.
It's a great monkey. By the way, you got to watch the end of the credits, this film, to get the last little snippet with the monkey.
Not among the others.
Gore Verbinski so had to fight for this sequence because it is expensive and it's so key to the movie.
The Moonlight Serenade.
Yeah, the movie has teased the whole notion of it being a ghost story and it being supernatural for so long that it was time to come out and actually give the audience a real taste of it. Very powerful, I think, that we have a villain who, in a very profound way, is actually sympathetic, or at least in a sympathetic situation. You actually feel bad for the state that they're in and the amount of torment that they've been through.
It's interesting about villains, and the most interesting villains have contradictions where deep down they are not entirely who they are showing us. In Geoffrey Rush's case, although he's doing all these heinous things, there is a suspicion that he's not a bad guy at the bottom of it all. There's a vulnerability about him. And after all, he's a man who is weary. He is weary of not living. And I think he lets that out. I mean, I have seen much bigger stinkers in my life than Geoffrey Rush.
Fortitude to follow orders and stay true in the face of danger and almost certain death.
This was, just in terms of production, this was probably the single most difficult thing to shoot because we had this location for exactly 1 day. And the scene as written was at least a day and a half or 2 days to shoot. You had all of these characters. You had the bird, which is difficult to deal with. You had to keep all of the modern aspects because just on the other side of camera, there's a town. There are cars driving around.
Of course it does. Satisfied?
Funnily enough, in the Quest of the Caribbean, the script that I'd written 12 years ago to do this, I had a mute and a parrot that talked. And I purposely didn't put them in my script because I didn't want there to be any legal ramifications or anything. And then, funnily enough, they turned up in the film anyway. Because you can't have a pirate movie without a mute and a parrot.
Yeah, actually, the parrot was actually necessary because, again, there's some ride references that need to be done, and having the parrot say different lines gave us an access back into the ride in a neat way.
But you didn't!
You'll get another one.
Actually, Anna Maria's introduction here is actually very important because she is a woman pirate. I mean, it's really very simple.
I always wondered if people got the notion that, or if it was clear that Anna Maria's boat that Jack stole was the boat that actually sank out from underneath him at the start of the film. And I'm also not sure if it's clear that the reason Jack says yes to Anna Maria is because he knows that this storm is coming and that he's actually going to need every able-bodied person.
I think the fact that he knows the storm is coming plays clear. Again, Jack, there is a larger than life. There is that kind of, he is tied into things differently than the other mortal characters in the story. This was miserable for the actors shooting this. I know that. This was actually out on real water with fireboats, spraying them down at 3 a.m. Not fun.
We're the compass that doesn't work! Aye, the compass doesn't point north! But we're not trying to find north, are we?
I remember I was 10 when I saw Raiders of the Lost Ark, and I just thought it was the greatest film ever made. I still do in many respects. And that's what I was always trying to emulate, Raiders of the Lost Ark on the high seas. And that meant, real action, real jeopardy, real stakes, and great bad guy and impossible odds.
Time to go, Poppy.
So, Terry, was the Black Pearl actually cursed?
There is some question.
Is there a curse of the Black Pearl? Is there a curse on the Black Pearl? Is there a curse with the Black Pearl? Well, what's the story there?
Despite the subtitle, there is some question as to whether the Black Pearl itself is a supernatural ship. Certainly, the production design seemed to allow it to move about very quickly with sails that didn't seem as though
they'd
they
catch
would
enough
be
wind.
all that functional. And absolutely, that wherever the Black Pearl goes, there is fog following it, preceding it, and certain environmental sort of changes. But technically speaking, the reason the Black Pearl is the fastest ship is because it has the sweeps, it has the oars, and not necessarily because it somehow has a supernatural ability to go quickly.
Although I think there is a supernatural aspect to the Black Pearl, even when it's under Jack's command. But that's not relevant to this story.
Yes, that would be more sequel.
How is it that Jack came by that company?
Way back when we were shooting the stuff in Tortuga, talking to Orlando, I had mentioned that it would be a lot of fun just at some point. Wouldn't it be great if Will imitated Jack in his delivery? I actually meant just gave a little twist to the words. Later, Orlando said, it'd be more fun to actually imitate his movements. And so he suggested actually to Jerry Bruckheimer, and Jerry was always really worried that the audience understand what the heck's wrong with Jack Sparrow. Why does he act like that? Why is he so goofy? So then we got the note. We want there to be a place where Will does this physical imitation of Jack. And we realized it would work in this scene because it is a scene where Gibbs talks about Jack, and it allowed Will is actually questioning about him. The most difficult line we had to write was Gibbs' response to Will's question. He says, "Is that the reason he's..." And he does the imitation. Gibbs' response, "Reason's got nothing to do with it," was probably the single hardest line we had to write because it had to allow Gibbs to get back to the story. It was, and it, in a way, I hate to put it this way, but it also, a reason is given, heat stroke, left on an island that Jerry wanted, and then we immediately negate that as the reason why Jack is the way he is.
But that works as intended. All the audience needs is a possible explanation that they can accept or not. But of course, the fun is Jack sunstroke? Is he drunk? Is he sly like a fox? Is he crazy?
And the whole thing always, the trickster, keep him guessing. You can't pin this guy down. That's just, it's not his nature.
Human hair.
He'd done some research and he'd found that the pirates were like rock stars in their day, and so he thought, well, who's the greatest rock star? Keith Richards. And he got out the eyeliner and he got a mouthful of gold teeth, which I think they scaled him back to like 1 or 2 gold teeth. But that was it. What's great is he gives just enough looks every now and then to let you know that he's actually 10 steps ahead of you, and that he really is calculating. He knows what's going on.
One of the fun things that we realized in doing this story structure, pirates are always associated with the notion of buried treasure, or taking treasure off, putting it in a cave, burying it, coming back to it later, but there's really not a lot of logic to that. Here, we actually give a fairly reasonable explanation for where all those legends may have come from.
Curse will be rich men. And you can buy an eye what actually fits and smells.
Sub-characters and smaller characters can provide a lot of color to a script and really complete it and make it a whole. A lot of your greatest laughs and moments from side characters. So they're very important to keep aware of and to always try and... I always try and populate my stories with those kinds of characters and not just, thinking about the main people. That gives you a more complete world. Here are more homages to the ride. This was always a part of it. We knew we wanted them in a boat in a dark cavern, and a crab and a guy with a skeleton second, because that's one of the iconic images of the ride.
That moment is actually the design from one of Mark Davis's original concept sketches for the ride. Mark Davis, of course, was one of the Imagineers who are actually the guy who really created the Pirates of the Caribbean ride.
And that was a case where we actually needed a cue to bring up the notion of betrayal that is on Will's mind, but how to justify him bringing it up. And actually, we went to the ride and looked at different images and said, well, hey, There's a skeleton with a sword
in his
stabbed in his back.
Yeah.
No treasure in silver and gold.
In my draft, I know we had a whole scenario of how they got in there, and there were traps all through this place in Isla de Muerta, and it was like Raiders of the Lost Ark. But I think in the end it just delayed the story going, and you wanted to get in there, get to the treasure, and keep the story moving.
100 times again! But
This was on a soundstage at Disney in Burbank.
none of us disproportionate to our crimes.
Here we actually do justify this treasure. They've been gathering all sorts of treasure that they can't spend, leaving it all in one place, searching through it, sifting through it to find these coins.
And they've been robbing all these ships in order to find these coins and return them to this chest, because the curse can only be lifted if all of the gold is returned, and if all the people who have taken gold out contribute blood back. Of course, at this point, they believe that Elizabeth has blood they need.
And at this moment right here, Jack knows that the curse won't be listed with Elizabeth's blood.
He actually knows it's Will's blood they need.
He's on his way now to bargain with Barbossa, keep Will out of the picture.
And sell Will out, probably.
And sell Will out, yeah.
In exchange for the pearl.
Who among us has paid the blood sacrifice owed to the heathen gods?
They've all given their blood.
Jeffrey Rush's eyeballs deserve
an Academy Award nomination, absolutely. Again, his performance, just the match between he and Johnny is just perfect. It just works so well. Barbossa is the dark side of Jack Sparrow in a big way.
The blood of the
Sorry, Jack.
Here's our hero knocking out Jack Sparrow and leaving him to the pirates, basically. And can you imagine if Luke Skywalker had actually knocked out Han Solo and left him to the mercy of Darth Vader? Not going to work. That's not going to work.
He's a little more substantial than the usual kind of straight character.
What I was talking about in terms of is that actually going to work is to set up the whole idea that they're going to cut her throat. But they don't. They cut her hand. And the real important thing is, at this point, Will, who is still operating under these kind of societal constraints, he has not yet accepted piracy as a necessity in his life, obviously. He's late. He doesn't get there in time. He doesn't save the girl. It's only because of Jeffrey's character that she's still alive. The whole waste not idea. And of course, this was our fun comment on all of those movies where, in order to establish how evil the villain is, he shoots one of his own henchmen, which I've always thought that's a good reason why that villain would have no more henchmen. But here we actually could justify him shooting one of his henchmen, and actually they still stick around. But it does presage a possible mutiny.
What's your father, William Turner?
And just pointing out here, Barbossa takes the coin out of the chest, not Elizabeth. He's already cursed. Elizabeth doesn't get cursed. She did not take a coin out of the chest, but there goes the coin that was taken from the chest, the medallion itself. I just had to point that out.
Right, it actually does track. Although my question is why aren't all those other coins stained with blood? I guess what happens is once it goes in, the blood must dissipate somehow, man.
Well, not all the coins have to be stained. There aren't 882 crew members here.
None of the others have any blood at all.
And those are at the bottom. They put the blood in first. It's like a parfait, Terry. Everybody loves a parfait. So here was something really funny is when the monkey was trained to point with his other hand, and so when we were shooting the sequence, they couldn't shoot the monkey pointing. They actually, Mark and Ursula, the animal traders, had to then work for like 3 weeks training the monkey to point with that hand. It was there's the realities of production. You can hire a monkey, you can have stunt monkeys, you can have double monkeys, you can have backup monkeys, but if you don't have a monkey that can point with his right hand, that's going to be a stall in the production.
My favorite thing is Barbossa looks to the monkey points, Barbossa understands exactly what the monkey means, and then has the ability to look, not only see that Elizabeth is gone, but notice that the coin, amongst all that gold down there, the key medallion is also missing.
And I just want to point out they're looking for oars, and here's the only one, is the one that Will used to knock out Jack.
You're supposed to be dead.
Am I not?
I also like that Jack is apparently genuinely suffering from having just been hit on the head. Doesn't immediately recover.
Parlay? That's the one. Parlay. 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 Damn to the depths whatever mutton they thought of parlay. That would be the French.
When Terry and I set out to write the story, we wanted to recapture in a contemporary way the feel of some of those golden age of Hollywood swashbucklers in those movies. And one of the things we noticed was missing were these turns, these great turns for character actors that you don't see a lot of that particularly in these summer movies where you just have sprinkled throughout these wonderful character turns. And so when we were working on the script, we actually basically pretended that we had a whole studio full of great character actors under contract. And so if, it was like with Murtaugh and Mulroy, the idea with those two guys was, we had under contract, there was this vaudeville team. They had one really famous routine. We're going to put them in the movie as the guards. We're going to adapt the routine to pirate legend and play it that way. And of course, when we were writing Gibbs, we always thought to ourselves, okay, this is the Alan Hale role.
And then Pintel and Righetti, again, they just came together and played off each other so well.
Yeah. Every actor in this movie just so loved doing this movie, too. They got to all be pirates. How often are you going to get that chance?
You know whose blood we need. I know whose blood you need.
There goes the chess match between those two characters again. Again, that idea of the two gods coming together and battling it out, and the mortals have to just look on.
Pirate. Yeah.
Usually when Ted and I are writing together, what we do, just in terms of process, is work out the structure. In this case, the structure of the movie, in terms of process working as a writing partnership, we will typically divide up scenes, write them individually, and then trade them back and forth. The important thing is that the scenes be properly worked out to fit into the whole before they can actually be, written in first draft form.
But don't stop.
I have 5 rules of screenwriting, and rule number 4 is always save the kiss to the very end. You want to keep that tension going all the way through. Will they or won't they in a love story? So always save the kiss to the end. The other 4 rules, just if you're interested, number 1 is no bookends. Number 2 is no bookends. Number 3 is never kill a dog. And number 4, always save the kiss to the end. And then number 5 is feel free to disagree with all these rules.
It was a gift from my father. He sent it to me. Why did you take it?
Because I was afraid that you were a pirate. Awful.
It wasn't your blood they needed. It was my father's blood. Why?
It was really funny. The thing that I was thinking about on this movie, do you know the one thing we talked about the most in terms of individual scene where if I wrote a scene and handed it to you and you then read it over and you had notes or something on it, the one thing we talked about most was actually the rhythm of the dialogue. It wasn't so much the specific words, it was always about rhythm. And there's actually a moment with Johnny coming up, it was really kind of fun to work out, was what we had written, he didn't really like. And we basically said, well, the only important thing here, it's the rhythm of the dialogue, is it just needs to match that rhythm. And I'll point that out when we get to it. And this, again, is the two gods, and they think the same. They act the same. They have the same concerns. They're both trying to create a deal with loopholes and to cover the loopholes and figure out how to come to a accord that they'll both be happy with.
What I love about this scene is that Johnny is in such a weak position. The audience knows it. He knows it. Barbossa knows it. All he's got is his mouth to keep him going in what he says. And instead of actually recognizing that he's in a weak position, he decides to go as a character just the complete opposite way. He'll presume that he's in charge, that he's offering a great deal, that everything should be just fine. But another Warner Brothers moment. It's such a an act of bravado on his part.
Scurry over to the Interceptor and I negotiate the return of your medallion, eh? What say you to that?
I see, Jack.
I wrote the first draft of Pirates in about 5 weeks, the second draft in about 8 days, because there was a rush. We needed to get the script to Johnny Depp. So you work with what you've got. They're telling you this is what I need, and whether you can deliver or not depends on whether you get the next job. The way Hollywood works, once you start getting credits going, when you start getting films made, people start paying attention, and of course they start to believe that you know now more than you knew yesterday. A lot of what we do as writers in Hollywood is called writing on assignment, and that's what Pirates was. It was an idea conceived by the Disney executives, and they brought these writers in to work on assignment to write their script for them.
Here is Elizabeth. We know that she's learned all this stuff about pirates, so she'd probably learn all this stuff about ships, and she's actually the one who's out there creating strategy that is equal to Barbossa's. Again, there is that potential to Will and Elizabeth, to various of these mortal characters, to match Jack and Barbossa if they can actually achieve that. There is always that question.
Neither of us are really experts at sailing, but it was fun to learn enough about it to where the things that are called out here and the maneuvers that are done, particularly the club hall maneuver, is actually a real maneuver that would be effective in this situation.
The strategies used here, there's only one moment where I wonder, but the strategies used in this battle and what's happening are actually pretty legitimate. At least the crew of the Lady Washington and our historical advisor and our rigging, our sailmaster, felt we were doing okay on that. And it just it was one of those things where quiet pride. I guess not so quiet. The sweeps, by the way, we borrowed from Captain Kidd's ship. Captain Kidd, his ship actually had a galley with oars in it. So that's not a bit of made up stuff. That's actually some historical accuracy right there.
Must fight! Load the guns!
With what?
Anything. Everything. Anything we have left. Load the guns!
Will is taking control of the fight, which is what he knows, and Elizabeth is in control of actually the ship, the piracy, the strategy itself, which is what she knows.
I love the expression that matches between the monkey and Geoffrey Rush when he first has suspicion that they're going to do the club hall maneuver. It's just one of those great little matching moments.
And what I love here is the implication that everyone right there understood exactly what she was suggesting the moment she suggested it, and they're going, "Oh God, that's." Well, and then also it's very important that daft like Jack. That's an important moment right there for Elizabeth.
The maneuver is one of desperation because there's the.
You're going to lose that anchor at the very least.
Yeah, you're going to lose the anchor. I love the fact that the monkey appears to figure it out just slightly ahead of Barbossa there.
That right there is strategically the best possible position that you could be in a ship-to-ship battle.
Yeah.
They don't have ball. The language that they're using, just firing whatever they could, cut glass and silverware, is more like a neutron bomb. It's designed not to do damage to the ship, but to do maximum damage to the pirates, to the other people on the ship.
Sea battles were violent experiences. I mean, there was a great shot just then of the pirates being able to see each other through the gun ports. That was very real. Cannons in these days weren't very accurate, so you had to get close. And cannonballs were disastrous on wood. I mean, that's what they're firing, iron against wood, iron cannonballs against wood.
You know, and I'm convinced that Gore wanted a pirate with a wooden eyeball just so he could do this gag. I am convinced that was where it came from. That whole thing was, he's got a wooden eyeball, we're going to fire forks. Yes, I like that.
The standard practice in naval warfare was for, usually there were 3 or 4 ships per side, and what the ships would do, they would line up in opposite sides, and they would just slowly sail by each other in 2 big lines that crossed, and they would just shoot, and the decks would just be awash in blood and rigging and nasty places to fight. And then, of course, once one of the ships was disabled, you'd have the boarding taking place, which is what happens next.
He's not what they're after.
This is close quarters combat at sea. This is a fraction of what it looked like. Obviously, the reality was much more gory and violent, but we're not allowed to show that in this film. This is a PG-13. We want young teens to be able to go see this. It's not an accurate reflection of piracy, but we weren't trying to make an accurate reflection of piracy. We were trying to make an accurate reflection of the romantic image of piracy, which started back with Lord Byron and a poem called The Corsair. This cannonball is chain link cannonball. There were several different kinds of shot that cannons used, and that cannon, the 2 balls linked by a chain, was specifically used to take down masts, as you'll see they do here, take down the rigging. And there was grape shot, and there was all different kinds, designed to inflict the precise destruction that it was intended for. Taking down a sail's rigging meant you made that ship inoperable, and that gave you a huge advantage. That often decided the fate of the battle. Now they can board the ship because they've taken down the mast, and that ship's not going anywhere, and they can do what they want to it. Rigging was as much a target as the guys on the other side, because once you immobilize them, you're out in the middle of the water. It's where are you going to go? It's not like you're on land somewhere you can just run or flee. Once you take down that mast, you are stuck out there. And in fact, one of the things seafarers feared most was the mast collapsing, or sails ripping, or just being stuck out at sea, because you would just go nuts. Literally, you wouldn't be able to move, and you're too far away to swim, and most of these guys couldn't swim anyway. And you would slowly go through all the food, and then you'd end up eating each other, and then you'd end up going insane, drinking seawater. So for a lot of pirates, a lot of seafarers of this time, that was actually a worse fate than dying, to be stuck out on a ship that was stuck in the water, dead in the water. There's a reason they call it a dead calm, because there's no breeze, there's nothing to get you moving, and you could die out there unless you get a breeze coming along. These ships are very accurate to the time periods. Pirates like to sail small, fast ships, hit and run. They were specialties at. That was their specialty, hit and run. And so the smaller ship, the lighter the ship, the faster the ship. The big warships, the man-of-wars, the galleons, they were reserved more for merchant vessels and for Royal Navy vessels, where you could have hundreds of guys on the ship and tons of cannons and things like that, and tons of storage space for cargo, for shipping your cargo around the world. The pirate ships were light fighters. They were very much guerrilla fighters, if you will. Find the ship, go out, hit it, take everything, and run before the cops came around. And so the smaller and faster the pirate ship, the better. The idea here, the Interceptor is a small, fast ship, and Black Pearl looks a little bit bigger. And of course, the Dauntless is the huge one. That's the most powerful ship in the fleet, but then again, not the fastest and not the slowest, and not, you know. What's good is that they really identify in this film different kinds of ships, and there's not one ship that has everything you need. Each ship has a particular strength and particular weakness. You know, the weakness of the small light ships is that you can be destroyed easily, but the trick is to run away without getting destroyed first. That was always the pirates' goals. They would sail in brigs or in, you know, little 1-2 masted ships, and hopefully the people they were preying on were in huge galleons, 3 masts, 4 masts, 5 masts, and they could hit upon them really quickly.
Any of you so much as thinks the word parlay, I'll have your guts forgotten.
You can't have a Jerry Bruckheimer film without an explosion. But nicely, that explosion works into the plot and works into, you know, the feeling that you've lost your hero. I think in all good stories, too, there comes a moment when you think the hero's dead. You know, going very much in good storytelling. Even in Star Wars, there's a moment where you think Luke Skywalker's died. He's taken by that creature in the garbage compactor. And for a second, it leaves you for a moment like, who am I going to identify with now? You know, he was the guy that I was, you know, rooting for. And it just gets you that moment of audience involvement. What now? What's going to happen now?
You can't. I can.
Who are you?
No one. He's no one. Distant cousin of my aunt's nephew, twice removed. Lovely singing voice, though. Unique.
My name is Will Turner. My father was Bootstrap Bill Turner.
This was really. This all worked really well, I think.
A little concerned about this scene, though, in that it could skate real close to parody or Monty Python. The key was to have the pistol under the chin and not up by the head.
Yeah, you might hit that Blazing Saddles Mel Brooks moment.
And the crew.
And again,
you have to be very careful how you negotiate with Barbossa.
And Jack knows we're all screwed now. Will's doing his best he can. That was, you know, I look at particularly the work that Orlando and Kira do, and you know, Jack and Johnny and Jeffrey have these big flashy roles. They're just wonderful performances. I kind of compare it in 48 Hours. Eddie Murphy was just brilliant in that movie, just electric. I mean, he really got a lot of attention. But Nick Nolte's performance in that movie is so important to anchor Eddie Murphy's performance to reality. It's the same here. Without the reality of Kira and Orlando give this movie an emotional reality, an emotional grounding that this was the gratuitous strip on the plank that we were talking about.
Black heart.
Oh, it's still warm.
But at any rate, just had to pause a moment.
Although necessary so that she doesn't sink like she did before.
Exactly. And she gets the dress back, and she's back in a little more vulnerable in this state. And then again, the classic iconography. As far as I know, no real pirates ever made anybody walk the plank. But you can't do a pirate movie and not make people walk the plank.
Well, actually, what was your line? We wanted to not make a movie about pirates.
We didn't want to make a movie about real pirates. We wanted to make a pirate movie. There's a difference. At any rate, the emotional reality that Kira and Orlando give to this story is necessary to make what these two are doing as real as possible.
Last time you left me a pistol with one shot.
Seasickness was a real problem, and so the first or second day they were shooting out on the Black Pearl, which, because of its height, really swayed. They gave everybody seasickness medication. but they didn't bother to read the label that said, "Do not operate heavy farm machinery, will cause drowsiness." And so there's some moments here where the fact that our actors are awake and giving the performances they are is just astounding. Actually, I think it was Zoe Saldana, who plays Anna Maria, was hit the worst. She was just but nobody was having a good time out here the first couple of days.
That's the second time I've had to watch that man sail away with my ship.
Just one of those things. You got to have a sandy beach, and you got to be stuck on the sandy beach with a beautiful girl, very simply, and with lots of rum. And they hit all these beats. Very, very important. Audiences come into a movie as specific as in genre as this is, expecting certain things, in the same way that going in to see a movie like Gladiator, you're expecting to see gory fights in an arena, and lions and Christians and things like that. In Pirates, we've got to hit all those beats that we know the audience is going to expect and love and want. Walking the Plank, Pirate, the Pirate with the Parrot, the Pirate Town, the Drunken Pirate Town, and then of course we've got all the scenes and vignettes from the ride to get in as many of those as we can without forcing them upon the story.
Rum runners use this island as a cache. Came by and I was able to.
This is getting towards the end of the second act. End of the second act, you always want to be the lowest moment for the heroes, the moment when they seem completely defeated. If you can imagine, screenplays are divided into 3 acts, which is really just fancy words for beginning, middle, and end. First act is about setting up the characters, setting up the story, getting the story going, the catalyst that inspires the story. And then the second act is about telling the story, and the third act is about wrapping it up. So if you can imagine that in every first act, you're going to be raising a question. In this sense, it would be, will Jack and Will rescue Elizabeth? Something very simple that is going to drive the whole second act. Then at the end of the second act, you want to answer no to that question. And that's what they've done here. Will's been taken away. They've rescued Elizabeth, but now Will's been taken away. And he's going to die, and they're stuck on an island, and they're never getting off. And so you're able to bring the audience down to a low, and then in the very next scene, bring them back up to a high again, because they're about to get rescued. And again, that's storytelling technique. Get them as low as you can, and then bring them up as high as you can, and that's where you get that roller coaster. Literally, you can see it as a series of highs and lows, and it keeps the audience involved. A boring ride is a flat ride. A fun ride is a ride that goes up and down, and that's really, literally what you're doing as a storyteller. You want to provide those highs and lows, and this is the biggest low at the end of the second act.
It must be really terrible for you to be trapped on this island.
Oh, yes. But the company...
The actors were just so incredibly respectful of the dialogue. It doesn't often happen to such an extent on a big budget major motion picture, but there were cases where runners would be sent to get either Ted or I to come to either rehearsal or during the scene to actually change even a single word, which was just it's a testament to the actors, but also to Gore and the whole production.
Actually, I was here on this island. I'm about 10 feet off screen. Well, actually, this was shot on a beach because we couldn't get it all on the island, but we were there. And most of what the actors say in this movie is actually as we wrote it. And it was just nice. It's almost the first time we've gotten a chance to find out, does the dialogue we write work for actors? And I will say that at least for actors from the Commonwealth and Johnny Depp, it did work.
Not good! Not good! What are you doing?
This is one of the conventions that we know of piracy. It's actually one of the truer ones. Pirates are being obsessed with rum. They were. And this is actually quite accurate to what pirates really thought of rum. That's what they did. They spent it all. They spent it on wine and women. And then when the purses dried up, they would go out on the account again, hit the next ship, bring all the money in and spend it all again and go out again. And that was the pirate life. Very carefree, very no rules, and they were outlaws. And I think it's the combination of all those elements that's made us romance them over the years. because I think in all of us there's a little bit of us that wants to rebel and live a life free on the sea and do as we please and just have a great time. And that's what pirates did. Of course, the conditions were just hellacious on ships in those days. It wasn't a pleasant experience. Often a lot of these crews were shanghaied, kidnapped literally at the docks and forced aboard the ship. And then once you're aboard and out at sea and you wake up and you realize you can't swim home, then you're stuck there and you got to work there. And that's how they crewed a lot of their crews in those days.
But then so was his decision to engage in piracy.
I love how Johnny plays this scene. The way this scene works is, this is the only point where we actually see desperation from Jack Sparrow. And he's right to be desperate because he's not going to budge Norrington on this. And it's actually Elizabeth who's able to make that change to get Norrington to do what Jack wants, oddly enough. There's actually there's only two things in this movie that were in the script that were actually shot that didn't make it that I wish were. And one of them actually is there's about a 45-second, 50-second coda to this scene after Norrington makes the decision to go between Jack Davenport and Keira Knightley. That was just a really nice moment where he acknowledges what the audience knows. He actually asks her, basically, I realize you're agreeing to marry me to go rescue Will. And it was just a nice moment where she acknowledges that, but she says, it's not a condition, it's just a request, and if you said no, I would still marry you because I think you're a fine man. It's interesting, disillusioned as she is with this whole piracy nonsense, she's now kind of getting into a position where she's accepting these societal constraints and saying, I will find a way to be happy within them.
Courtney said you missed a bit.
This scene was, I know, added to get some more information out about Bootstrap Bill, Will's father. It's a very delicate balance you have to strike, knowing how much information to give to an audience, how much exposition you need. Exposition scenes generally boring because it's just people telling you what you need to know. So as a rule, you try and avoid them at all costs. You don't want people talking about the past. You want to either show the past or not have it be that important to the present. And I think in the early test screenings that people were a little bit confused about who Bootstrap Bill was and what became of him and all that. So this became necessary to explain. And you'll notice that they interjected with jokes like this to keep it fresh, so it's not just one person saying, blah, 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 this is what you need to know. It's threaded in comedy or in tension or in something else. It's hard to have, two characters talking about the past, especially if they both share the past. And really the only way you can do it is if one character is angry at the other and saying, remember when you were poor and penniless and I saved you and da-da-da-da-da. But the only way you can pull it off. Fortunately, in this case, this is all about informing Will who his father was.
That's what you call ironic.
Brilliant.
I don't care for the situation. Any attempt to storm the caves could turn to an ambush.
Not if you're the one doing the ambush. I go in, I convince Barbossa to send his men out with their little boats. You and your mate return to the Dauntless and blast the bejesus out of them with your little cannons, eh?
The other scene that I actually miss, I wish had been in here, but it wasn't necessary, but it was just one of those nice additions, was the one between Jack and Elizabeth aboard the Dauntless just before this, where they talk about the fact that where Jack basically says, we're not so much different, you and I, Elizabeth. Peas in a pod. Because she's basically done something as ruthless as Jack would have done. And of course, Jack doesn't actually trust her because of it. He no longer trusts her at all to do what he wants, and so he gets her locked away.
No reason to fret. Just a prick of the finger, a few drops of blood.
No mistakes this time. He's only half turned. We spill it all.
Guess there is reason to fret.
One of the things that really kind of solidified for me working on this movie, and it went to the actors, it went to the crew, all of the department heads, is that everybody in Hollywood pretty much what they want to do is the best work they possibly can. That most of the complaints and most of the frustrations that come in from filmmaking come from feeling that artificial limitations have been put on doing the best work you can. Remember when we were shooting in the Caribbean, the actors were actually up at the most luxurious resort in St. Vincent, which is not to say it was a luxury resort. It was the most luxurious. But the only time they ever got frustrated or annoyed was when they couldn't shoot, when they knew somewhere acting was happening and they couldn't be part of it. It was actually kind of fun to find that out.
I was particularly impressed with Johnny Depp, who the only time I think I recall him getting upset was just making sure that the proper safety precautions were in place, especially regarding being like walking the plank or being like over the water. Of course, I think Johnny hates water. That may be part of it, but he was actually genuinely concerned for the other actors.
Closed water, I think he's okay with, but that open ocean water, not too fond of.
The little payoff line I always thought would be nice there is, do you think he was telling the truth? And the line I think was supposed to be, he doesn't tell the truth even when he's telling the truth. But maybe that was a bit over the top. But I think that does sum up Jack's character pretty well.
All men to row out to the Dauntless, they do what they do best. Robert's your uncle, Fanny's your aunt. There you are with two ships.
This was actually the moment, the rhythm thing that I was talking about was, I think initially in the script, he says, your men do what they do best, chop, 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 stab, 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 voila. There you are with two ships. And Johnny didn't really like the chop, 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 stab, stab, stab. And again, in terms of constraints, I just said, well, all we need is something that's fun to listen to that hits that rhythm. And that's when he came up with the Robert's your uncle, Fanny's your aunt, which actually has that same chop, 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 stab, 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 voila rhythm. I just thought that it was let them make up what they want as long as it fits what we want it to be.
So in terms of the mechanics of the curse, here's a rather key moment, and it's
Right
even
there.
provided for you in slow motion, and there's actually two shots, and we actually let the Will character register it, but it's right there for those who might miss it, mostly critics, that Johnny has actually stolen a coin for himself. He's predicted that he may be able to divide and conquer Barbossa's forces, but he's anticipating a battle to come. And if you're going to bring off this whole strategy and try to defeat this guy, he figures, hey, a little insurance, I might as well make myself immortal just in case.
And that's also the moment where Will realizes that from the beginning, this has been Jack's plan. To get Will close enough to the treasure to lift the curse, but at the moment that is most profitable to Jack, which in this instance would also be most profitable to Will. And I also want to point out, Jack's plan here was to keep all of the British on the Dauntless and have all of the pirates row out in rowboats where basically the Dauntless can just keep firing cannonballs at them until the curse is lifted. He did not anticipate Norrington going to ambush the men as they came out of the cave, and he did not anticipate this. And this moment right here, this is why you want your supernatural pirates. This is why we actually went in. That was our big contribution. There had been a couple of screenplays developed previously to our involvement that had a Jack Sparrow character, had Will Turner, had Elizabeth, had the basic setup. But it was that absence of the supernatural. What did Barbossa want? At that point, Blackheart, I think. And we just went back to the ride and said, look, there are all these stories, all these legends, and in the ride itself, all of these elements of the supernatural, and they've never been used in a pirate movie. Let's go ahead and do that. Let's bring in those elements and make them overt.
Yeah, the ride begins with a talking skull, and the ride talks about, ye have seen the cursed treasure.
Not afraid of evil curses, says ye. Properly warned ye, says I.
But the other thing that that taking the reality of the movie into the realm of the supernatural does is it actually allows the audience to go along into a world that they'll accept a certain amount of stylization. A supernatural story is a stylized story. It's a different world. And I'm not sure that audiences would have accepted things such as walking the plank or talking parrots or the whole rest of it unless we had already brought them in and actually said, this is a ghost story.
Well,
Once they're in the ghost story, then they can start to accept some rather amazing or crazy things, including the Jack Sparrow, the Johnny Depp performance of Jack Sparrow.
Well, we didn't want to do, like I say, we didn't want to do a movie about real pirates. We didn't want to do a naturalistic pirate movie. We wanted to do a pirate movie, a swashbuckler, a romance in the classical sense of the term. And of course, the horror genre actually descends from the romance genre through Gothic, and there are similarities between the two. There's a lot of overlapping conventions, and by bringing in the supernatural element, again, like Terry says, it heightened the reality and allowed us to then do the romance. The Anthony Hope quote, the romance genre gives to ambition the boundless field, to courage the high moment, to love the ideal object. And that's the story. That's what we wanted, were those moments, high adventure. This was an amazing sequence to watch shoot, because the way it was done was, first you had the pirates, the stunt pirates and the acting pirates, and the Navy guys, and they had choreographed this incredible melee, and they did it. Then all of the pirate guys went away, and the Navy guys did it themselves, by themselves. I think Jack Davenport described it as learning to do a tango, and it's only you don't have a partner. And then they brought back the pirates and got rid of the Navy guys, and they did it. So it was really just an amazing thing to watch. Just the coordination and the skill of the stunt performers, particularly, just amazing.
I must admit, Jack, I thought I had you figured. It turns out you're a hard man to predict.
And here's what every good story leads to, an exciting climax, usually with several things going on at once, several stories being all wrapped up at once in a way that's fun, exciting, and doesn't require a lot of explanation.
Incredibly stupid.
And of course, this is Jack's plan in operation. Separate, lower the numbers, and he knows Will's skill with the sword. Like I say, my theory has always been that Will, in this movie, Will is the best swordsman. Barbossa and Norrington are evenly matched, and Jack is actually the worst of the four. If you noticed, he loses both of the sword fights he's in. He technically loses them both. But his idea was lower the numbers, let Will deal with what he has to do, and then at the opportune moment lift the curse. And it's finally coming into play. He's finally got all the pieces where he needs them to be.
Right. What would you pick to eat first?
One of the most satisfying things about being involved in writing Pirates of the Caribbean was being a part of the Disney legacy. And this is a ride that's been around for 30, 40 years now, and has thrilled people all over the world for that length of time. And so to be a part of the team that brought it to the screen for the first time is just fantastic and scary at the same time. We were really hoping this worked, but we were pretty sure it did. I was always convinced it could work if done right. The real danger was whether we'd get done right or not, and fortunately it was. So it's been a real joy and a real honor to be a part of. They do a great job here of cutting around all the different ships and keeping you aware of which ship you're on and what's happening. It's a credit, I think, to the writing and to the director and to the editors. Because you could easily get confused about who's where and what's happening, but I think it keeps it very clear.
Make for the ship! Move!
Here's again real violence. You don't have to show the blood splattering, you just have to know that it's happening. And that's the difference. If we wanted to make this R, we would have shown that. But we wanted to keep it just under R and keep it at PG-13. And that was always part of the design.
Thing that I'm amazed at, having seen it shot, that Gore and Darius, do I have that right?
The cinematographer.
That the use of camera movement, Gore was able to seemingly predict on the set, and in terms of storyboarding, exactly the times when...
There's a shocking moment. I don't think anybody expected that to happen. Or that. And Terry and I actually came up with the idea of doing a supernatural pirate movie 10 years ago, or a little bit more, and one of the things we wanted to do was, we'd seen the Harryhausen movies where you had the human fighting the skeleton. We wanted two skeletons fighting, and we finally got it.
Couldn't resist, mate.
There's an expression called squeezing the lemon out of your premise. And that's what they're doing here. They're getting the most out of this idea of undead pirates being able to be seen as undead in the moonlight. They're having their two leads jump in and out of the moonlight, both as skeletons, and it's fantastic. A lot of times you'll see in movies that you thought, oh, they could have done more with that or something, and that's what I'm talking about. They didn't squeeze the lemon enough. You got to squeeze that lemon dry and get the most out of what you've set up. And good stories will do that every time, and that's what's done here.
And the CGI here, the animation here, the fact that the skeletons maintain the performance of the actors. They maintain that performance, but they don't just do it with the hero characters, with our main characters. It's every single one of those pirates is individualized, and the movements are specific and matched to the actor who was playing the role in the first place. It's really extraordinary accomplishment, and no way could that have been done 10 years ago.
So what now, Jack Sparrow? We to be two immortals locked in an epic battle until Judgment Day.
And this, of course, is the final proof that Johnny really is a badass pirate, and he's really, ahead of everyone, and that he's a real sword fighter, and that he really, can hold his own with the best of pirates.
You with me?
Here's a great example of Ted and Terry's writing. This whole idea of the pirate code being more like a guideline. It starts with Captain Barbossa to Kira, to Elizabeth. Elizabeth then transfers it to these guys, Gibbs and his pirates, and then at the very end of the film, Gibbs transfers it to Jack Sparrow, and so you get this nice, recurring line coming back, and you see where it's come from. So, in the end, Jack is saved by his crew at the very end because of something that Captain Barbossa said to Elizabeth, 2 hours before. And that's fun. It's very clever. Here's another great pirate convention. You got to have a great battle at the end. In my draft, this was when the pirates came to Port Royal in force and tried to take the town. Here, it's a battle out at sea with the undead pirates fighting. But this is one of the staples that you have to hit: a great big battle with swords and guns, close quarters combat going.
One of my favorite moments, I think, is coming up here. It's where Murtaugh and Mulroy come up on the ship.
We have to lift the curse.
Yeah, here they are.
Oh, this moment.
And
This was pure
It,
gore.
uh,
This was gore.
You almost half expect them to back away or something, and instead they just become such legitimate characters there by the fact that they are willing to just step into the fray. They are actually Navy men, soldiers.
Second hardest line in the movie to write. Gore wanted Elizabeth to have that hero moment when she appears and to have the hero line.
You like pain? Try wearing a corset.
And we actually referred to it as the cheesy hero line. We wanted that line. But it had to be a cheesy hero line, but it still had to be good. And it had to have something to do with story and had to do something to do with character. Second hardest line in the movie to write.
Pirates favored short swords for close quarters combat. You know, they didn't want big broadswords like in Braveheart, the Scottish Highlands, or anything like that. They weren't trying to cut through armor. They didn't wear armor. They wanted light, short rip swords that they could stick in their pants and jump onto a ship with and pull out and catch you. And you'll see here, I mean, this is where the cutlass came from. The cutlass is a small, short, curved sword. And it's a devastating weapon in close quarters combat.
Okay, just want to point out, everybody who took a coin from the chest is cursed. To lift the curse, all the coins have to go back in with the blood of the people who took them. Jack just slit his palm in order to get blood on the coin he took and threw it to Will. Will now has both his coin and Jack's coin with blood on it, and now Will has put blood on the coin he had.
And this is the opportune moment.
The opportune moment. There's all the blood, all of the coins, all of the blood. The curse is gone. And here's the proof. The bullet that's still lodged in his heart kills Barbossa. It all makes perfect sense, Terry. Well done. Well done, sir.
And this is what you, of course, call your irony. He finally feels only to feel his own death.
You know, a lot of this, too, I have to admit, was influenced by EC Comics, the horror comics, Tales from the Crypt and stuff. The comics, not the series of films made from the comics, but the comics themselves, where so much of that, the horror was based in the idea of irony, of just dessert, of the, you wish for this, then you're going to get it tenfold. You're greedy? Fine. Be greedy forever. You'll always starve. You'll always be thirsty. You'll always be horny. That's what greed really is. And the pirate's curse, compelled by greed, consumed by greed.
Bruce Hendricks, the
head of production at Disney and line producer and second unit director in the movie,
was happy to
a lot of job.
Was happy to find out that we weren't going to actually show the hand, and that it didn't have to actually be created. A little bit of cost savings there on a $160 million movie.
And also more effective to have it off screen. And then here's the meeting of basically our Abbott and Costello on acid and Laurel and Hardy.
Finally, the pairs meet. Now,
and again, this moment it's like, oh, you could have cut sooner, but Jonathan Pryce. It's worth it. Let's just watch Jonathan Pryce act here.
There actually aren't really multiple endings on the movie, because pretty much until the resolution of the love story and whether or not Jack can get his ship back, yes, the villain's been defeated, but there are these other stories that have to be tied up.
Here's my theory. We kind of just didn't bother with that typical 3-act action movie paradigm. We didn't fit the story to work to it. I mean, if it typically defeating the villain would end everything. That's your final movement. But we also didn't have the villain have some sort of plot that was going to be a threat to the rest of the world that had to be stopped. Everything stayed on a personal level. I think you made the joke one time that, oh, good, we finally get to do a $130 million character movie. But it's all driven by character, by the character decision and the character design. And the story's not over until the character stories are over.
And it was fun to not worry about convention or break convention. But I think also it was just, we were having
conventional action movie storytelling. We were very aware of the romance and pirate movie conventions.
Can't expect more than that.
And Jack Sparrow spent the whole film getting out of tricky situations. So by this time, you know he's got to get out. But the great thing is you don't know how.
Jack Sparrow, be it known that you have
Captain Jack Sparrow.
Still insisting on being called captain and still wants you. All he wants is the respect, you know. But you have heard of me, that kind of thing. He just wants the respect at this stage. He's about to be hanged. Could you please call me by my title? Pirates were hanged. They started to really crack down on piracy in the early 1700s. And they used to hang them publicly. Captain Kidd was hanged in 1701 and the rope broke the first time. And they had to rehang him a second time. Another pirate was hung and stopped twitching and they brought him in to be embalmed and he woke up and he was alive. And they realized they figured they had to let him go because they'd already carried out the sentence. Unfortunately, he'd lived, so he got to go free again.
general lawlessness. And for these crimes, you have been sentenced to be on this day, hung by the neck until dead. May God have mercy on your soul.
Governor Swan. Commodore.
Elizabeth had become so disillusioned with the whole idea of pirates, and now here Will finally is stepping up and becoming the romantic pirate hero that she dreamed of meeting, you know, when she was 12 years old. It's the guy who breaks the laws for what he believes is right, not for his own gain, but for other people. You go back and you look at Captain Blood or the Seahawk or Crimson Pirate, and those guys, they may start off as pirates, but they end up as rebels. They end up as people who are outlaws with a cause. And that's the romantic image of pirates, and that's what Will becomes. He's the first and only pirate in the movie who is actually a pirate movie pirate.
A thing I always try and stick to is for the third act is a hero who does something at the end that they never would have done in the beginning, but it's logical because of everything they've done in between. In simplest terms, that's what you look for. And that gives you a character-driven third act. And that gives meaning to your whole second act and the growth that occurred in that second act. If your character's doing something at the end that they never would have done in the beginning. And here's Will doing something he never would have done in the beginning. He would never have rescued a pirate that was about to be hanged. He would have enjoyed watching him hang. And here he is risking his life and condemning his life, in effect, to save this pirate because he's realized, he's learned the difference, that you can be a pirate and you can be a good man at the same time. And notice this is really the first time that Jack and Will really are working as a team together, and they're in tandem. Look at that. And that's deliberate. That's thought out. By this stage, we want them hand in hand, reading each other's thoughts, that kind of thing.
Escape attempt. But not from you.
On our return to Port Royal, I granted you clemency. And this is how you thank me? By throwing in your lot with him? He's a pirate.
And a good man. If all I have achieved here is that the hangman will earn 2 pairs of boots instead of 1, so be it.
And this was, the lesson. I noticed in a lesson in my draft, it was, learning that that not all pirates are bad. Of course, they were back in the day, for real, but in our romanticized version, they're not. There can be good pirates, and that's what Will's come to learn, and that's what he's now imparting the wisdom to Norrington and the governor. Norrington, of course, represents the guy who thinks all pirates are bad. They break the law. They're criminals. Hang them.
It is.
Well, I'm actually feeling...
If you're going to break the law because the law is wrong.
Spiritually?
Not because, you want somebody's TV. And there's your moral message for today. It is a Disney movie. Yes, indeed. There is a happy Aesop's Fable moral to it. I love her reaction to that idea. And doesn't it also raise the question, exactly how far was she willing to go on that island, and how far did she go on that island? Because there is a bit of, shut up, Jack.
I said
And again, the nice hat was something that Orlando got a couple of comments on just when he was walking around in the costume, and it ended up actually as the perfect thing for Jack to say as his farewell line.
Idiot. He's nowhere to go but back to the noose.
It's a fairly difficult rescue here. You have to count on a lot of different things. You have to make it to the edge. You have to survive the fall down into the rocks, and you gotta get your ship to come back at the right moment.
See, this is the moment, the scene that I was talking about aboard the Dauntless, where he acknowledged that was she doing it because she loved him, or was she agreeing to marry him out of love for Will? That moment, I think, would have set this up even stronger. And again, Jack Davenport, without that moment, Jack Davenport's performance is what carries the believability and the emotion of what happens in this next bit. You actually accept Norrington having made this small change. And also, you understand, he loves Elizabeth so much that he actually puts her happiness ahead of his. Like I say, had Norrington been a pirate, he would have been a pirate movie pirate.
Thank you.
Even though he changes, he doesn't change that much. He's only going to give him a day's head start. I think he's still going to be out there after him.
He's still Norrington.
Yeah.
He's still a feared pirate hunter, but he's going to basically say 1 day's head start, and then we're going to go after him. And of course, there's also just the sport of it as well. Actually, I think Jack does say the Black Pearl was the last real pirate threat in the Caribbean. Norrington's taking care of everything else. That's the last opponent he has is Jack Sparrow. Room for a sequel? Maybe. And there's the hat hair, by the way.
He's a pirate.
That's what we've been waiting for, the whole movie. And they deliver it when? Right at the end. That's rule number 4. Don't forget that. And then, of course, you got to end on Jack because he's really the star of the movie, the fun. You want to end a film like this on a laugh. You know, again, we're talking about James Cameron's recency effect. The last thing you remember as you walk out of that film. You know, you've had a wonderful climax with skeleton and pirates fighting each other in and out of the moonlight. Now you want to end on a laugh.
We figured they were more actual guidelines.
We were on set for the filming of this scene, and as it turns out, Johnny Depp actually wrote what I believe is our favorite line.
My favorite line in this movie.
Mine as well, which is actually the last line. And what was great was because of the stunt of him coming up onto the ship, it caused this line to have to be written that day. It was actually written in the morning. So Bring Me That Horizon was actually not in the movie as of 6 a.m. the day it was shot. And
this was always intended to be the ending.
Exactly. It's a good job, Johnny.
Bring me that horizon. And really bad eggs.
So there it is, Pirates of the Caribbean.
The Curse of the Black Pearl.
The Black Pearl. This is Terry Rossio.
And Ted Elliott.
My name is Jay Walpert, and as I said, I'm one of the writers of Pirates of the Caribbean. And the only other thing I want to say is if you're getting ready to set out to sea, destroy all your rope. Pirates swing on that stuff.
Again, my name is Stuart Beattie. I was the second writer on Pirates. Thanks for watching the DVD, and hope you enjoyed it. Just a quick word about the credits, just so that you understand what this means. Screenplay and screen story. All the scripts at the end of the shooting are given to the Writers Guild of America, and they get 3 working writers to read all the scripts and decide whose script looks most like the finished film. And they decide the credit based on that. And when certain writers have contributed enough to the film where, you know, they've influenced story elements and things like that, they'll get story credit. And that's what Jay and I both got, because we had influenced how the story took shape. But it was really Ted and Terry, who were there on the set every day, and of course the whole Kurtz element and all that kind of stuff was all brought in for them. So that's how it roughly breaks down. But we were all part of the big process, and like I said, I think we all had the same goal, which is why it worked into one very cohesive script, not a butchered script with 3 different voices in it, which then translates to, I think, a great fun film. So thanks for watching. And
I just wanted to say, for everybody who's stuck all the way through to the end here, I'm going to give you the timeline so that you and you alone can know how the events of the story play out, or what actually happens before the story begins. And so the way it starts, 10 years earlier, Jack showed up in Tortuga. He was the captain of the Black Pearl. He was going after the treasure Isla de Muerta, and he had the compass. Because remember, Barbosa said, Gibbs says that he gave up the bearings, which meant he knew where it was, and you can only know where it is if you already know where it is, and so he had to have already had the compass. He also knew about the curse, and was in fact the person who told Barbosa and the crew about the curse. That's the point where, in the jail cell, he says, there is a curse that's interesting. He knew about it. He didn't believe it. Barbosa tells Elizabeth, when we first were told the tale, by who? By Jack. We thought it was just a ghost story too, and we didn't believe it. Bootstrap Bill was already a member of Jack's crew before he recruited Barbosa and the people at Tortuga. And that's established when he talks about how he knew William Turner, as William Turner. He obviously had a different relationship with Bill Turner than he had with Barbosa or any of the others. So he gets this crew in Tortuga, Barbosa and a bunch of his cronies, including, more than likely, Pintel and Righetti. They go sailing out. First day out, Barbosa says, look, if we're all going to have a share of the treasure, we should all know where we're going. And that's where Jack made his huge mistake. He told him where Isla de Muerta was, making Barbosa somebody who could find it because he already knew where it was. Jack's thrown overboard with the compass. He's marooned. Bootstrap Bill, while he probably didn't participate in the mutiny, he stayed on board. And the reason Jack is okay with that, he says at the end of the movie, he did what's right by him. And that's the most you can expect. He stuck by the code. And of course, Pintel says Bootstrap Bill was a man of the code. So there you have it. So he showed up, he had the compass, he recruited the crew, including Barbosa. Bootstrap Bill was already a member of his crew. He gave up the bearings to Barbosa. Barbosa led the mutiny, and that's why Jack hates him. He violated the code. Just pointing that out. Got thrown overboard. Bootstrap Bill stays with the crew. They all go to Isla de Muerta. They find the treasure. They know about the curse. They don't believe it. They take all the treasure. Each of them, including the monkey, takes a bit of the gold. At that point, apparently had no name. Then, as they go out partying, carousing as they will, they discovered that they were cursed. Now, while it's not specifically stated in the movie how they learned how to undo the curse, there is an awful lot of Aztec writing on that chest. And my guess is they went back, they learned that they needed to put all the gold back. Bootstrap Bill, in the meantime, had been feeling guilty because of what they did to Jack. It was in violation of the code. And he said, you know what? We deserve to be cursed for what we did and to remain cursed. And so that's when he sent one piece of the gold to Will in England, because he never wanted the pirates to be able to lift the curse. Barbosa got really pissed off, strapped him to a cannon, and dropped him into, as Pintel says, the crushing depths of Davy Jones' locker, implying that perhaps while Bill Cursed is still alive, he may be a very thin puddle on the bottom, on the ocean's bottom. All right, so that's what happens to Bill. The pirates are cursed. They're now looking for every piece of gold to put back, and then they find out what they hadn't found out earlier. All of the blood had to be returned to. So now the pirates have two things to do. They have to get all the gold back, and they all have to add their blood to the chest. 8 years earlier, and that happens between the time that Jack showed up to Tortuga and the time, and 8 years earlier when the Black Pearl destroyed the ship that Will was on. Because the Dauntless was there, the power in these waters, the Black Pearl left without getting Will and without getting the coin. That's where Elizabeth stole the coin. For the next 8 years, the pirates continued looking for all of the gold. Finally, when Elizabeth, wearing the medallion, fell in the water, the pirates, the gold called to the pirates. They came after it. It was the last medallion, the last piece they needed, and they thought Elizabeth had Turner blood, and it was Turner blood was the last bit of blood they needed to lift the curse.
So do you think that...
Did I miss anything?
Do you think that
Does that make sense? Trust me, go through the movie, it's all there.
Now, do you think that the reason why the ship was destroyed at the very beginning, was it the powder magazine, or did the pirates attack? And if so, was it because the medallion touched the water? Or do you think they were just out?
Yes.
I think so, because otherwise they were just out searching for gold. They would have gotten awfully lucky. So I think somehow that medallion touched the water, brought the pirates.
And then the appearance of the Dauntless.
Right.
Again, the power in these waters, because while the Black Pearl does have some amount of supernatural associated with it itself, sequel, it still can be sunk. It still can be damaged. And a 100-gun ship like the Dauntless is going to basically turn it into kindling. So the pirates, discretion being a better part of valor, took off. And finally we catch up to the events of the story.
Or we're simply lost in the fog. Which is another possibility.
And well, it's an unnatural fog. So.
Or maybe it was Elizabeth singing that...
It drove him away or called him down, because the Gibbs does say, you'll bring cursed pirates sail these waters. So did that all make sense? Does that all follow? Did I forget anything?
It's amazing. It's like a fine clockwork. It's just, all there.
But again, a very odd way to give information in a movie, but it's seems to have worked.
We got away with it.
We're creating a new cinematic legend.